Please welcome Van Johnson.
Van Johnson once whispered the names of the secret loves he had in old Hollywood, the gay actors he dated when such truths had to stay hidden. Born Charles Van Dell Johnson on August 25, 1916, in Newport, Rhode Island. Van came from humble beginnings before rising to become one of MGM's biggest heartthrobs. He was the face of hope and charm in an America that craved optimism during tough times. His story isn't just about the glitz and glam, it's about quiet strength, heartbreak, and the private battles he fought behind that flawless Hollywood smile. Van wasn't just a matinee idol, he was a man living two lives, the adored movie star and the private soul struggling to stay true to himself in a world that demanded perfection. After his father's passing, Van was raised by his mother, Loretta Snyder, who spotted his natural flair for performance and pushed him to chase it. She saw the spark before anyone else did. As a teen, Van was drawn to the stage theater and music became his escape, his lifeline. With nothing but determination, he left for New York City and threw himself into the grind of Broadway, taking whatever work came his way, chorus lines, small parts, endless rehearsals. Those years weren't glamorous, but they built him. The exhaustion, the uncertainty, the sleepless nights, all of it shaped his craft. Then came the big break. Hollywood scouts couldn't ignore that fresh-faced charm and magnetic energy. When MGM signed him, the golden gates of fame swung open and Van Johnson stepped through, ready to become the studio's next shining star. Van Johnson's big break hit during World War II, and it couldn't have come at a more powerful time. His clean-cut looks and genuine charm connected instantly with audiences who saw in him the kind of man they wanted to believe in, kind, real, and full of heart. He wasn't the tough guy or the slick rebel like so many other stars back then. Van was the everyman, the guy who smiled through fear, who showed that courage wasn't about being invincible, it was about staying human. In his wartime films, he didn't just play soldiers, he became them. His characters weren't emotionless heroes. They were men who cried, laughed, and loved, showing the human side of war that people desperately needed to see. Then came the moment that nearly shattered everything. In 1943, while filming A Guy Named Joe, tragedy struck. A camera crane came crashing down on set and smashed into his head. The blow was so bad that doctors feared he wouldn't make it. For weeks, he lay between life and death, his career hanging by a thread. The injuries were brutal. He needed metal plates placed in his skull, leaving him with scars that would mark him forever. But Van didn't just survive, he came back stronger. When he returned to the screen, audiences saw something new in him, something raw and real. His pain had given his performances more soul, more truth. People didn't just admire him anymore, they felt for him. By the late 1940s, Van Johnson was unstoppable.
3 days. 3 days.
4 days.
So it's like a half a week.
But that half a week,
Yeah,
split week.
split week.
Buster West and I on an old vaudeville act.
Yeah.
But I have also
What did you do
played
in your vaudeville act?
Hits like 30 Seconds Over Tokyo, Battleground, The Cane Mutiny, and In the Good Old Summertime showed off every side of his talent. He could be brave, romantic, funny, all in one breath. Every role carried that same warmth, loyalty, and honesty that made him one of Hollywood's most loved stars. Van Johnson had that special something, a warmth, that made people trust him instantly. To audiences, he wasn't just a movie star. He felt like someone you actually knew, that loyal friend, that protective older brother. His image was spotless, wholesome, and safe. But behind that polished charm was a man carrying secrets, pressure, and pain that Hollywood never wanted the public to see. While the world saw Van as the golden boy of MGM, his private life told a very different story. He was guarded, almost painfully private, constantly trying to balance fame with his own truth. The studio system of mid-century Hollywood was strict. They owned your image, your story, and sometimes even your love life. There was no space to be vulnerable or to live freely without fear of career-ending rumors. Van endured it all with quiet strength. After that near-fatal accident on A Guy Named Joe, he pushed through lingering health issues and emotional strain, never letting the public see the weight he carried. He kept showing up, delivering performances that glowed with heart, even when his own spirit was running low. By the 1950s and 1960s, the glitter of his fame started to fade, but Van never gave up. He kept working films, TV shows, Broadway stages, touring plays. He did it all. And as time passed, people began to see him with new eyes, admiring not just the charm but the depth he brought with age. His later roles felt real, full of wisdom and reflection, shaped by a lifetime of love, pain, and endurance. Then came the Hollywood love story. Everyone talked about his marriage to stage actress Eve Abbott on January 25, 1947. But this wasn't just a romance. it was also a production. In the golden age of Hollywood, studios controlled everything, even who their stars married. And Van Johnson, one of MGM's biggest moneymakers, wasn't free to simply follow his heart. Audiences couldn't get enough of Van Johnson's clean-cut, all-American glow, that perfect smile, that charming boy-next-door vibe that made everyone adore him. MGM had worked hard to build that image, pouring everything into making Van the dream man of Hollywood. So when he married Eve Abbott, the press went wild. The wedding was sold as a fairy tale come true, the golden boy finding his perfect match, settling into picture-perfect love at the peak of his fame. Eve Abbott wasn't just a pretty face, though. She had her own story in show business, a former stage actress with elegance, wit, and a sharp understanding of how brutal fame could be. She knew the cameras didn't always capture the truth behind the smiles. Together, they built what seemed like the ideal Hollywood home, complete with glitz, grace, and one big piece of real joy, their daughter, Skylar. She became Van's heart and anchor, the light in all his chaos. Those who knew Van up close said he was a deeply loving father, gentle, protective, and totally devoted to Skylar. Whatever storms were brewing in his marriage, his bond with his daughter stayed pure and strong. He wanted to be the kind of dad he never had, the kind who showed up and made her feel safe. In a town where many fathers were absent, Van stood out. He was there, always. His family story didn't stop there. Through his marriage to Eve, Van also became stepfather to her two sons, Edmund Keenan and Tracy Keenan Wynn. And Tracy later made his own mark in Hollywood, writing hits like The Longest Yard. That role as stepdad gave Van's public image even more weight. He wasn't just the charming actor anymore. He was the dependable family man everyone wanted to believe in. Life inside the Johnson household wasn't always picture perfect, far from it. Behind the smiles and glowing magazine covers, things were complicated. Van tried hard to keep the peace, showing up for his family and doing his best to be that steady, loving presence. Blending families under Hollywood's constant spotlight was no easy task. He wanted harmony, but fame had a way of magnifying every small crack until it turned into a fracture. Even though the world saw them as the dream couple, pressure started to build the demands of work, the expectations of the studio, and the silent battles happening at home. By 1961, the tension finally became too heavy to hide. Van and Eve quietly separated after more than a decade together. It wasn't loud or scandalous at first, just a slow unraveling of what had once been sold as forever. And because of the era's strict social rules, they didn't rush to divorce. It took 7 long years until 1968 before they officially ended things. By then, Van's star wasn't shining as brightly as before. The old Hollywood system that had controlled every move of its actors was crumbling, and with it came a new kind of freedom, though not complete. People could finally start being a little more open, but it was still risky to show the truth behind the curtain. Then came Eve's bombshell claims that turned quiet gossip into full-blown Hollywood talk. She said Van had been gay, and that their entire marriage had been set up by MGM to protect his image. She called it a lavender marriage, one meant to hide the truth and keep rumors from killing his career. And she wasn't wrong about one thing back in mid-20th century Hollywood. Just a whisper about someone's sexuality could end everything overnight. Hollywood in the golden age was ruthless when it came to image. Studios would go to shocking lengths to keep their stars looking pure, even arranging marriages just to make sure the public never doubted a thing. Every move, every friendship, every glance was controlled to protect that box office magic. And no one knew that pressure better than Van Johnson, the red-haired, clean-cut sweetheart America adored. With that innocent smile and easy charm, he became the poster boy for wholesome masculinity. MGM built that image brick by brick, crafting Van into the dream man of the 1940s. He was the safe bet, the one mothers loved and women swooned over. But behind that carefully polished mask, there was another Van, one quietly defying the rules, living a life far more complicated than anyone could imagine. He moved through a world of coded gestures, secret romances, and late-night whispers because the truth could destroy everything. In private moments later in life, Van reportedly opened up about those hidden years. He spoke softly of the men he had loved, relationships that had to stay invisible under the harsh eyes of the studio system. "I didn't have the luxury of being honest," he once confessed. In those days, honesty could destroy everything you worked for. That single line said it all: the pain, the fear, the impossible double life so many stars were forced to live. Back in the 1940s and 1950s, Hollywood was ruled by strict morality clauses, and being openly gay wasn't just frowned upon, it was career suicide. The studio bosses kept tight watch on Van's every move, controlling who he was seen with, where he went, and even how he smiled in public. Still, he found connection in secret, and among the names he reportedly mentioned from those hidden chapters of his life was none other than actor Montgomery Clift. another soul who knew the cost of living truthfully in a world built on illusion. Montgomery Clift, another MGM star who, like Van Johnson, hid oceans of pain behind those soulful eyes. On screen, Monty radiated sensitivity, but off-screen, he battled demons that few could ever understand. According to stories linked to Van, the two shared a secret, emotionally charged bond that existed entirely in the shadows, away from the glare of the Hollywood spotlight. Monty was different, Van reportedly said. He felt everything too deeply that made him dangerous to himself and impossible not to love. Their connection ran deeper than attraction. It was built on shared understanding. Both men were trapped inside a system that demanded lies and punished honesty. They knew what it meant to smile for cameras while hiding the truth in plain sight. It was a quiet rebellion, one played out in whispers, hidden glances, and stolen moments that could never be spoken about. Van's private recollections didn't end there. He also mentioned another star who faced the same impossible double life, Tab Hunter. Tab was the handsome golden boy of the 1950s, a heartthrob groomed by studios to fit their version of the perfect leading man. He would later live openly, but in those early days, he was forced into fake romances to protect his image. Van reportedly said, "Tab was sweet, scared, and so young. We were all pretending, but he hated pretending the most." That one line said everything about the pain of living behind a mask. And then there was Rock Hudson, Hollywood's ultimate symbol of the industry's secret code. Though there's no hard proof that Rock and Van were ever romantically involved, Johnson is said to have admitted that many men in their circle shared the same reality love in silence, truth in hiding. Rock understood the rules better than anyone, Van reportedly remarked. "You smiled, you dated who they told you to date, and you never slipped. It was the cruelest game in Hollywood, and they all knew the cost of losing it." Whether they were close friends, confidants, or something deeper, Van Johnson and Rock Hudson belonged to a hidden brotherhood, a quiet circle of men bound together by silence and survival. These weren't casual flings or secret thrills. As Johnson later explained, they were emotional lifelines in a world that punished honesty. "We weren't sneaking around for excitement," he reportedly said. "We were trying to survive without losing ourselves completely." That raw truth captured exactly what it meant to live in constant fear of being exposed. For Van and others like him, secrecy became a reflex, a way of life. Meetings had to be carefully arranged through people they could trust, conversations whispered behind locked doors, and every move measured in shadows. Even love had to wear a disguise. His 1947 marriage to Eve Abbott wasn't just a romance, it was a calculated piece of MGM's image control. And Van didn't hide that fact later in life. "Some people married for love," he said. "Others married for protection. Sometimes it was both, but often it was neither." Those words hit hard, showing how deeply the studio machine shaped every part of a star's identity. In his later years, Van wasn't chasing scandal, he was chasing truth. He didn't want to expose anyone. He wanted people to finally understand the cost of surviving in a system built on fear. "I don't regret the love," he reflected. "I regret the fear." That haunting confession showed how much had been stolen from those forced to hide who they were, just to keep working. Now, time has given Van Johnson's story a new meaning, one filled with empathy and understanding. Beneath the glittering illusion of old Hollywood were real people. People forced to split themselves in two just to stay alive in the spotlight. By finally admitting to the men he had loved in secret, Van didn't just reveal hidden chapters of his life, he reclaimed the truth that Hollywood once made him bury. "We were there," Van Johnson once said softly. "We just weren't allowed to be seen." Those few words carried the weight of decades, a lifetime lived in the shadows of fame, truth, and quiet strength. By the early 1990s, after a career that had defined an era and etched his name deep into Hollywood's golden history, Van decided it was time to step back for good. He had given his youth, his energy, and his heart to the silver screen now. He wanted peace. Far away from the blinding lights and constant headlines, Van created a sanctuary for himself in a beautiful penthouse at 405 East 54th Street on Manhattan's East Side. The place reflected everything about him: class, calm, and a touch of old-school charm. After decades of scripted perfection, he found comfort in the real rhythm of New York City, the sound of life outside his window, not the artificial echoes of a movie set. There, surrounded by memories of his extraordinary past, Van lived quietly, no cameras, no stage directions, just peace. As the years went by and his health began to fade, he chose to move to Tappan Zee Manor, an assisted living community in Nyack, New York. Even then, those who met him described him as gracious, humble, and kind a man who carried his fame like a whisper instead of a crown. On December 12, 2008, Van Johnson's long, remarkable journey came to an end at age 92. His passing marked the close of not just one life, but an entire chapter of Hollywood's most glamorous and secretive age. His remains were cremated a simple, quiet farewell for a man whose life had once lit up the big screen with so much heart. Van Johnson is remembered not just for his movies, but for the truth he dared to live even when the world tried to silence it. He stood for charm, resilience, and the courage to keep smiling through the storm. If you loved uncovering the hidden stories behind old Hollywood's most fascinating stars, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video. There's so much more to tell, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video. There's so much more to tell, and you won't want to miss what's coming next.